Here's our friend Dave Olson. If we started calling Confederate statues Civil War participation trophies, would the left, especially the control left, leave them alone? I think I'm going to do my next firewall about this nonsense, this idiocy, this insanity with the monuments. As we said earlier today, the problem, one of the many problems with this progressivism is you have to keep going. You can't stop. You have to continue to be outraged, and you have to be outraged about something new. People are already bored about being outraged with certain things. You got to think of new things. And so now the target is these Confederate monuments. There's a lot to say about this. First of all, I interviewed Dinesh D'Souza yesterday, and Dinesh pointed out, well, they want to tear down a statue of Robert E. Lee, who by all accounts was anti-war, anti-slavery, man of incredible integrity and honor, a person who could have prolonged the Civil War with guerrilla fighting, just had to say a word and the entire army of North Virginia would have melted into the hills and we would have had another 15 years of guerrilla warfare. But Robert E. Lee just personally said, no, that's beneath us. These people beat us, and they're our countrymen, and we need to show them respect. And there are many, 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 many cases of people in the Confederacy in the years after the war. The Confederates could apply for a pardon, and many of them did, but many of them did not, and they thought it was a shameful thing. And there's a story about a father whose son, not a pardon, a parole, I think was the term, a Southern father who found out that his son had applied for and received a parole, and the father was absolutely incandescent with rage that the son had dishonored them by appealing for for mercy and making an apology for something that they didn't think they did wrong. He was absolutely incandescent. And the son said, but Father, General Lee advised me to do it. And the father just sat there for a second. He said, well, that alters the case. Anything that General Lee says must be right. So he did an awful lot did an awful lot of good and showed a lot of courage. And so this idea of destroying the monuments is just crazy. And there's a lot more here. I mean, I was thinking about this morning, as a matter of fact. I think probably the most loathsome person that gets a monument of any size or has an actual name would be Nathan Bedford Forrest. Forrest was the guy who started the Ku Klux Klan. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a slave trader before the war. He may have been one. I could have been one afterwards. And a thoroughly unpleasant man. I think he killed personally something like 17 or 18 or 19 Union soldiers, and he killed 18 guys, and he had 17 horses shot out from him or something. He says he was one horse up at the end, something like that. And he was barely literate and not a nice guy by any standard. He was a real horrible, basically evil person in many, many ways. But Forrest was the only person, I think, in the entire war who went from private to not just to general, but basically be given his entire army and entire command. And through whatever miracle of environment and genetics and all the rest, Forrest had a tactical sense that was simply astonishing. I think they called him the Gray Ghost. He was a raider, and so for the first half of the war, nobody took him seriously. He was harassing, the North behind the Union lines, but that wasn't like the battles going on in Virginia or in the West. But as time went on, he actually started to take his units and turn them into real units and go up against Union regulars. And his tactical genius was just amazing. So somebody says, Brent Cates says they tried to dig up General Forrest's grave today. There's so much disturbing about this lunacy. One of the things that's disturbing is the idea that you can erase history, that you can go and undo things in history. That's what the entire progressive movement is about in terms of ginning people up. We're not only going to correct slavery, we're going to undo it. We're not just going to fix it and recover from it. We're going to undo it. We're going to make it so it never happened. There's that. there's the barbarism of it. There's the vanity of it. There's the vanity of it. And there's a couple of interesting paradoxes here. And I want to know why it is that the further away from the Civil War we get, the more hysterical people become about it. You would think it would work the other way around. You would think that if anybody wanted to dig up the graves of this slave trader, it would have been Union soldiers and especially black Union soldiers after the war. You'd think by any reason that would be when it would happen. You would think that after you got 160, 170 years after the conflict, that all of the steam would have gone out of that. But forests, graves sat dormant for what I don't know what it is, 140 years or something like that, 120, 100 years, whatever. And now people are outraged about things that they weren't outraged even a year ago. And that's because they have to be outraged. It's their job. And it's disgusting. Nathan Bedford Forrest has had statues put up, not because Nathan Bedford Forrest was a good guy, but because he was a part of our history and he did remarkable things. And as Dinesh D'Souza pointed out, there's so many statues of Robert Byrd, who was a KKK Kleagle. And everything in West Virginia is Robert Byrd. I remember doing an afterburner on this a long time ago. The Robert Byrd interchange, the Robert Byrd rest stop on the turnpike, the Robert Byrd Research Institute, the Robert Byrd Community College, blah, 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 blah. Well, why don't you tear all of those down? Because he's an actual living racist, or he was, 5-6 years ago. So why not do that? Well, because he's a Democrat, that's why, and because he's a Northerner too. I'm telling you, if this isn't stopped, then what's going to happen is this. These savages who wanted to rename the dorms in Princeton and all the rest of it and so on, these savages will tear down these Civil War monuments, and some people will be convinced that, well, maybe we shouldn't have them up there. It was, a monument to slavery and all the rest. It wasn't a monument to slavery. It was a monument to courage. There are no monuments to slavery in the United States. There may have been one, I remember, that was a little weird just a short time ago. But basically, Stone Mountain and all the rest of it is monuments. It's a monument to courage, and it's a monument to the hundreds of thousands of men who died who don't have monuments. They were people too, and they deserve to be remembered. They did very big and courageous things, and these punks, these nothings, these people who get up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and whose biggest achievement is clearing a level on Call of Duty, out there with this moral arrogance of it, and we're gonna clean society of all of these racist things. Well, first the Confederate statues will go, and then the statues of people like Shakespeare and all the rest of it. And essentially, then all of the white people's statues will be removed, and then you'll have nothing but statues of Africans and feminists. But even they will go because the intersectional feminists will say that this monument to Helen Gurley Brown, how can we possibly have a monument to this monster who was not gay and who couldn't possibly understand the trans woman of color's position, and it will just continue until it eats itself. Folks, what this is it's I was thinking about this on the way in today too, because I'm going to be talking about this in some depth, and it's something really disgusting about destroying history. And we saw an example of this, I want to say about, what is it now, 16 years ago, right after the 9/11 attacks, or right before, I don't remember. It's been a while. The Taliban went to these Buddhist statues that had been there for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. There were these gigantic statues carved into the side of the mountain, and they had been there forever. They'd been there before Muhammad. They'd been there forever. And the Taliban went in there with dynamite and blew them up. And the entire world was outraged at this. And I thought, what is it? What is that dynamic? And then I realized that there are some things that they've got a pass. They have a hall pass. You don't blow those things up. There have been so many people before you who disagreed with them, and they didn't blow them up. And now you have ended this historical thing. And people like the Taliban and these Antifa people, because they're the same kind of people, they're the same kind of fanatic lunatics. They want to destroy things that have been here forever. And some of them, given the power, would destroy Westminster Cathedral without a thought in their minds. They'd destroy the Cathedral at Notre Dame without a thought in their minds. They would tear down everything. If they had the power, they would do it. And the arrogance of this. These things are bigger than you. And they're not hurting anybody. As I said, we get further and further away from the time that these things were, when these statues were erected, and by any reasonable standard, the pain of what they're memorializing should be less and less and less, to the point where you're a generation or two down, it's like it's just completely academic. But this is these monsters. They're monsters, these kids. I always generalize, and I apologize for that. There's some terrific millennials, and many of them are in the military. But these progressive left-wing students are just monsters, and the people who created them are afraid of them. But it's too late now. They've created them. I was doing this on. I'll tell you about it next week when I come back. In any event, it's a disgraceful thing to see, and somebody's going to need to put some of these people in jail. I mean, really in jail for a while. And somebody's going to have to enforce the law. And I'm a little disappointed in President Trump's Justice Department. I think they should be much more aggressive about this. We should never see another one of these Ben Shapiro can't speak at UCLA events. These things should not be happening in the era of Donald Trump. They should not be happening. That's one of the reasons he was elected. Ben Shapiro has enormous courage. He's got tremendous moral courage. He's got a great deal of physical courage as well. And Ben Shapiro is a soldier, and he would go to this school and face this kind of rage and violence. And he'd do it for a reason. He'd do it for a principle, and it was a noble principle, and it should be defended. So now that Trump is president, the president's Justice Department should say to UCLA, you will permit free speech on this state-run campus, or you will lose your federal funding, and we will come in and arrest those of you who are violating the First Amendment. And then you provide very adequate National Guard security, and you just ram it down their throats enough. You teach these children monsters that they don't always get what they want. And if you decide that you're going to break windows and try and beat people up because you disagree with them, then you can certainly do that. I've seen 15 or 20 of you beat up some student, some old guy in a wheelchair or on crutches. I've seen you do that. But I would like to see how you deal with National Guardsmen or actual Army regulars. I'd like to see how you deal with them, because these people fight back, and no one's ever fought you back, you miserable coward bastards. And that's why they're doing it. You know, it's a cowardly thing to do. Tearing down a statue is a cowardly thing to do. It's done in the middle of the night. Ironic, isn't it, that that the people who are so incensed about Nathan Bedford Forrest and the Ku Klux Klan are using exactly his tactics, the cowardly tactics of a midnight raid. You know, just going to go out at midnight and do it. And I bet you anything that the people doing it had masks over their faces like the rest of these Antifa swine. So, you know, you look at the Ku Klux Klan and you say these people are horrible, fanatic, racist, and they're cowards because they're not showing their faces. The exact same thing is true of these Antifa people. They don't show their faces either because they're cowards, and they hide behind that mask. And they don't just hide behind it so that they don't get caught. They hide behind it because it gives them a fig leaf behind which they can act out their violent fantasies, which they've had for quite a long time. They're bad people. Bad people. I'm going to do one more.